Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for braving this horrible weather out there. I hope you're not too drenched. But welcome to Houston and welcome to Texas. Today we have a very special program. We are delighted to have the ambassadors of Lebanon and Syria with us. It's a rather unique occasion, especially at this time of such dramatic events in the Middle East. The geopolitical regional role of Syria and Lebanon is very important. Now the focus is on the Palestinian issue with Israel, but let us not forget that any comprehensive peace between Israel and its immediate Arab neighbors will have to include Syria and Lebanon, and that the peace will not be complete unless there is peace on the northern front. So in my too long experience on Middle East affairs and negotiations, the needle will once again turn toward Syria and Lebanon, maybe sooner than we even anticipate, given what happens on the Palestinian front, which is necessarily the focus today and for the immediate future, and with the disengagement plan of Prime Minister Sharon, which I think will be completed, if all goes well, by September. Then there'll be a momentum built in the Middle East, hopefully on nation building for the Palestinians, and then also for looking at how the peace can be made comprehensive. I do want to recommend that you take a look, if this interests you. We just published last week, just before Secretary Rice went to the region, a Baker Institute Israeli-Palestinian workshop report, which I think is standing the test of time immediately, which really is a prescription. I call it the street map to the road map, which is really a prescription for what the U.S. leadership role should be in bringing the international community to help coordinate this extraordinarily important moment in Israeli-Palestinian relations, as we've seen in the summit meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, in which Prime Minister Sharon met with President Abu Mazen and with President Mubarak of Egypt and King Abdullah of Jordan. So with that in the background, we have two very competent and active spokesmen for their respective countries. You have their biographies. I would just like to highlight that Ambassador Farid Abboud, an old friend that I've known for many years, is born in Beirut. He studied political science at the University of St. Joseph in Beirut, and history at the University of California in Los Angeles. So that was good training for your job as ambassador to the United States, although the culture of the West Coast is quite different than the culture in Washington and the East Coast, I'm sure. But a lot of it is still show business, you know that. But and in academia, he certainly is no stranger. He has a PhD in history from UCLA, and he taught political science from 1973 to 77 and until 1999. He joined the Lebanese Foreign Service in 1973, and he had very important postings in Washington, Moscow, Rome, London, and as I mentioned, Los Angeles. He was the delegate of Lebanon to the monitoring group of the April 1996 understanding in southern Lebanon, and he's been ambassador of Lebanon since 1999. He has been a very important interlocutor between the large American Lebanese community and the government of Lebanon. We have Nijat Faris here, who's a very prominent member of that community, and George Cody of the American Task Force on Lebanon. Ambassador Imad Moustapha is the Syrian ambassador to the United States. He also has a very distinguished and remarkable academic credentials. He was Dean of the Faculty of Information Technology at the University of Damascus and Secretary General of the Arab School on Science and Technology. He is the co-founder of the Network of Syrian Scientists, Technologists, and Innovators Abroad. He was an active consultant to several international and regional organizations on science and technology policies. The president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, brought Imad into his inner clique of advisors because of the president's own interest in computer technology and modernizing Syria through internet IT capabilities. Imad was also a member of the Syrian team responsible for drafting reform strategies for the ministries of culture, education, and higher education. He's a prolific writer with a long list of publications in English and Arabic, and he had a hand in the UN-sponsored Human Development Report in the Arab world, which is really a very important report. The UNDP reports on the freedom deficit, the education deficit, and now the human rights deficit is coming out. And he's been all over the news programs, as both the ambassadors have. And he has a PhD in computer science from the University of Surrey. I've got to tell a little joke about Imad because we have the U.S.-Syria workshop, U.S. dialogue, and one of the very first ones, I asked the president of Syria to bring some young, innovative people to be the participants on the Syria side, and one of them was Imad Moustapha. And then during one of our discussions, we were talking about Syria's relations with the United States, and I made the point, you need young, dynamic people to come here as ambassadors. And I pointed to Imad, and I said, like Imad Moustapha. 6 months later, he was appointed the Syrian ambassador. I never had that much luck in our own government in nominating people, but anyway, that's part of the... I'm going to sit down now, and I'm going to moderate this, this unique session and ask both of our participants to comment, and then if we do have time, we'll take questions from the floor. We're going to try to cover a lot, and I will take out my watch to make sure that we don't go too much over the appointed hour. We're going to talk about U.S. Lebanese and U.S. Well, first we're going to talk about Syria and Iraq, and then Syria and Lebanon, U.S. Lebanese and U.S. Syrian relations, and then Syria and the Israeli-Syrian peace negotiations, and Lebanon and in the context of peace. And then if we do have time to broach this whole issue of the broader Middle East and North Africa, which is this whole thrust for economic, political reforms in the Arab world writ large. So the first issue, that's a burning issue, is Syria. Well, first let me backtrack one bit and just ask our two ambassadors on what they see as their country's respective role in supporting the forward movement, hopefully, of peace on the Israeli-Palestinian front. So I'll ask the Lebanese ambassador first if he has any comments on that.
Lebanon has always been committed to a comprehensive settlement, and I think we have expressed these views many times. We have a very important issue regarding that because we have a very large contingent of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and we feel that is a settlement, a comprehensive settlement, which would address this issue, is extremely important for us. So we are still hoping for a resumption of negotiations toward the achievement of a comprehensive settlement of the Middle East problem.
On the Syrian perspective of what's going on right now, I want to say that Syria has been very supportive of Mahmoud Abbas. We think that there is a window of opportunity. It is not a secret to anyone that Syria has had very difficult relations with the late Palestinian President Yasser Arafat. Now Mahmoud Abbas has came to Damascus, and I think we are enjoying now a honeymoon in Syrian-Palestinian relations, and we are very supportive of what he is trying to do. We are hopeful that what is happening right now in the Middle East might evolve into a comprehensive and fair Middle East peace. So we are watchful and we are crossing our fingers.
Mr. Ambassador, could you elaborate on that in terms of Syria's support, as you said, for Abu Mazen and what he is doing? Abu Mazen has made part of his approach, a central part, bringing Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad into and under the authority of the Palestinian Authority itself. And we know that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have a presence in Syria. Is your government supporting that effort of bringing Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad under that umbrella?
On one hand, what's going on between Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, and the other Palestinian organizations is happening actually in the occupied territories in the West Bank and Gaza, and Egypt is playing a major role mediating between those two sides. Yes, we do have small offices of those organizations in Damascus. We do not have direct involvement with these organizations. However, we can say that we did use whatever little leverage we have on the people in those two offices to convince them to engage constructively with Mahmoud Abbas. So in a way or another, I would say that when Mahmoud Abbas came to Damascus a month ago, he left feeling that Syria has been very supportive of his role and his mission.
Mr. Ambassador, the role of Hezbollah looms large. When I was in Israel and Palestinian territories just about 10 days ago, the Israelis are very concerned about Hezbollah's role in supporting, in the recent past, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and funding them. What is Lebanon doing or not doing vis-a-vis Hezbollah's activities in this regard?
Well, there is a conflict, a military conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis, and one of the elements of is Hezbollah. And it is obvious that the Hezbollah issue can be settled within the framework of a comprehensive settlement. But to expect that on one side, all the political actors, whether Hezbollah or others, simply stop their fight or their struggle or what they perceive as their righteous grievances, while the other side is still occupying the land, is a bit, off the mark. I think the best way to reach a modus vivendi in this respect is to engage in a negotiating process, and through this negotiating process, the problems of violence in the area would be, resolved. Violence is part of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and it's a two-way street. The number of innocents killed in my country and among the Palestinians exceeds by far the number of innocents killed on the other side. We should address the issue of violence, of political violence, from this comprehensive approach, and one of the elements is Hezbollah.
Let's take that a step forward. Either one of you would like to, or both of you like to comment. Let's assume that Abu Mazen succeeds in bringing Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad under the umbrella of the Palestinian Authority. What will Hezbollah do in those circumstances? Will it still continue to preach resistance and violence, or will it accede to what the Palestinians themselves are determining is the new phase?
I think there are a lot of political actors apart from Hezbollah who have very specific views about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And the only way to stop all the violence is to address these issues. There are issues of state emergence for the Palestinians, of refugees, of justice, etc. It's not simply a police problem. Sometimes I have the impression that people talk about this type of violence or Hezbollah or other as if it's simply a police matter. It's not a police matter, it's a political issue. And the political issue would be solved by a political process. And Hezbollah is only one element of this political process. It's not simply by itself the issue of violence.
Do you wish to comment on that?
I may disagree with what have just been said. I strongly refute the claim that Hezbollah plays a role in what's happening actually on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza. I think this is an exaggeration and a myth used by the Israelis to justify their hostility towards Hezbollah. However, I would agree with Ambassador Abboud with what he has just said. I would say once the political issues are addressed, all these so-called obstacles to peace will just disappear. once the core issue is addressed, and the core issue is the right of the Palestinian people to have their sovereign, independent state, and the end of the Israeli occupation to parts of both Syria and Lebanon. Once there would be a political will by both sides to engage, I would say everything else will come into place. And these are just pretexts not to engage.
Iraq, a critical issue. We've just had the elections in Iraq, and hopefully the Iraqi people are on their way toward defining their own form of representative government, which will most likely have an Islamic identity, but the manner of which that will be up to the Iraqis to determine. But how would you characterize, Mr. Ambassador, Syria's policy toward Iraq, the elections, and the future of Iraq? It's obviously a burning issue in U.S.-Syrian relations.
This is a thorny and complicated issue. Let me start by admitting that, yes, we did oppose the U.S. invasion of Iraq on a principled basis. We thought before this war happened that the theories that were presented in Washington, D.C. about what will happen if the United States troops go to Iraq have nothing to do with the reality that will take place there. But of course, our advice was never heeded. We always thought that invading Iraq will cause more troubles in our region, but most importantly, and because of Syria's particular position in the Middle East, we feared that invading Iraq will steer extremism and fundamentalism in our region. Our worst expectations became true, I mean, we're not feeling now happy about this because we are really troubled about what's happening in Iraq. Now, what's our strategy towards Iraq? Our main objective today, our paramount concern is the preservation of the territorial integrity of Iraq. We fear that with this level of chaos, of lawlessness, of violence, of death and destruction and bloodshed, Iraq might spiral down into civil war and this might cause the disintegration of Iraq. For us, this is a major concern. And we fear that this might have a domino effect in our region, and we really do not want this to happen. Now, once an objective observer will understand our strategy towards Iraq, our paramount concern, I think he will or she will understand that the accusations about Syria actually fueling the violence in Iraq become absurd and preposterous. Having stated this, Syria has a high stake in stabilizing the situation in Iraq, because we understand that this continuous violence and bloodshed might cause what we fear a lot, which is the disintegration of Iraq. And this is why we have gone out of our way in trying to secure the Syrian-Iraqi borders and trying to engage with the United States on whatever issue they raised with us on Iraq. Now, when the United States approached us and asked us to support the elections in Iraq, we told them we are supporting the elections in Iraq, not because you are asking us to do this, but because we believe that helping the Iraqi people build their institutions, regardless of how they might be flawed or they might be criticized by other factions, but we believe that this, whatever we do, helping the Iraqi people building their national institutions, will actually accelerate Iraq's regaining its sovereignty and will help us reach a point in which the state of insecurity and lawlessness and violence in Iraq can be contained. So we did support these elections. We allowed the Iraqi people in Syria to have their voting centers and their election campaigns and everything. And I think we ended up having a letter of gratitude from Prime Minister Alawi thanking Syria for the positive role we played helping the Iraqis in Syria participate in these elections. Of course, this was never reported or commented on here in the United States. It was absolutely ignored.
Could you comment on the Kurdish issue. Obviously, there's an important Kurdish population in northeastern Syria. And what is your assessment of Kurdish aspirations? Do you think that from the Syrian point of view, they will opt for becoming part of a unified Iraq under whatever government emerges? Or do you think that the thrust of Kurdish nationalism in an independent state is a real threat? Obviously, Syria, Turkey, Iran, all would be immediately affected by that.
Judging what the Iraqi Kurdish leaders have told us, and they do visit Damascus regularly, they do not want this to happen. They do understand that the repercussions might be very negative and very damaging to the whole region because of what you have just mentioned. There is the Turkish element, there is the Iranian element, there is the Syrian dimension, in addition to what might happen in Iraq itself. And I think everybody knows about the tensions that are already heated tensions between the Turkomani and the Kurdish minorities in Kirkuk. Now, what I'm trying to say is the following. What the Iraqi Kurdish leaders are telling us in Damascus is that they only want to be a part of a democratic federal Iraq, and we are very happy with what they are telling us. If there is something hidden, or there is a hidden agenda, we hope it will not become a reality, because it will cause more and more troubles in an already troubled region.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you any questions on Iraq because you're a little distant.
I'll ask him about other things.
I will, don't worry. I'll give him equal time. I will make him sing for his supper also, don't worry. I'm going to start that now. Syria and Lebanon.
Here we go.
United Nations Security Council 1559. Let me read for the audience a very brief summary of Resolution 1559 of September 2004. The Security Council reiterates its strong support for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and political independence of Lebanon. Notes the determination of Lebanon to ensure the withdrawal of all non-Lebanese forces from Lebanon. It's gravely concerned at the continued presence of armed militias in Lebanon, read Hezbollah. Reaffirms the importance of the extension of the control of the government of Lebanon over all Lebanese territory. This was at the time mindful of the upcoming Lebanese presidential elections, that these be free and fair according to the Lebanese constitutional rules devised without foreign interference or intervention or influence. Therefore, reaffirms its call for the strict respect of Lebanon's sovereignty, calls upon all remaining foreign forces to withdraw from Lebanon, read Syrian forces, calls for all...
That's your reading.
Well, that's...
Probably they meant the Chinese troops.
Yes, you get the Chinese troops out of Lebanon, that's right. I hope the Chinese Consul General isn't here, but anyway, that's a joke. Calls for the disbanding and disarmament of all Lebanese and non-Lebanese militias, supports the extension of the control of the government of Lebanon over all Lebanese territories, and declares its support for a free and fair electoral process. Now, the joke in diplomatic circles is that Syria is the only country in the post-Iraq military action, by U.S. going into Iraq, to actually bring George W. Bush and Jacques Chirac together on a major foreign policy move. And I noticed that the French Consul General is here. I mean, this is a remarkable achievement of your country. You are the only country that has brought this about. And so I applaud you on that. But this is a serious, all joking aside, the 1559 is a key issue. And I've noticed if you bring up the internet, the reflections on the implications, I'll just read some major themes. Syria is in a fix now, or it's a purely internal matter. Everyone else should stay out. Unusual American-French agreement. Resentment about Syria's performance in terms of what's happening in Lebanon, et cetera. I mean, it's all over the map. But I'm going to ask first the Lebanese ambassador about his assessment of the implications of UN Resolution 1559 and what it means to Lebanon. Mr. Ambassador.
The issues which are raised by in the 1559 are issues which have been in Lebanon and addressed by the Lebanese for a very long time. The simple fact is that this is a resolution which specifies very goals and does not indicate about the distance between the goals and the present realities and how to cross this distance. There is always a host of resolutions at the UN which are like that. I mean, you can state whatever you feel is fair, and it should be. In the end of the day, we all believe that Lebanon should be sovereign. The Syrians should withdraw eventually. There should be no armed forces in Lebanon except those of the Lebanese government. Yes, these are the goals. But stating them or making a resolution does not really dismantle the situation which have led to the creation of the situation in Lebanon. The Syrians came to Lebanon during a period of upheavals in the country. There was a civil war, and they have their constituency in Lebanon, meaning that there is a large Lebanese group or large Lebanese categories of the people who consider that the Syrians' role is a stabilizing factor. There are other people who criticize the Syrians and who want them immediately out. Probably in the next elections, we are having an election in May. This will be the main issue in the elections, and that will be the theme of the electoral campaign, and the options will be weighed. But all Lebanese agree that the relation with Syria should remain a special relation, but there are disagreements about the way it is conducted, some past mistakes, etc. In the end of the day, Syria is our only open border. We don't have any other border. The other border is the sea. And in the south, it's Israel, which is not an open border because it is a closed frontier, because there is a conflict. So all our economic or our commerce are either to Syria or through Syria. So there are a lot of interaction between the two people, between the two economies, between the two systems. And simplifying the issue simply as the Syrians trying to take over Lebanon, etc., is a misreading of the present realities, of history, and of what's going on, really. Whether there is a possibility of implementing 1559 the way it is as far as the Syrian withdrawal, I doubt it. It's a process. It's an incremental process, a piecemeal approach, and the government is doing that, the Lebanese government. As far as the militias, we do not consider Hezbollah as a militia. There was a decision at the end of the Lebanese war to dismantle all the militias that were involved in the war itself, and all of them were dismantled. Hezbollah did not get involved in the Lebanese war. It was actually founded after, in 1983, not in 1976, 75, when we fought the Lebanese wars. Basically, the perception of the Lebanese of Hezbollah is not that of a terrorist organization, and we disagree with the US about this denomination. We think it was a guerrilla group which conducted a successful guerrilla warfare against the Israelis that were occupying southern Lebanon, and the guerrilla war was successful. Hezbollah is a mainstream political group in Lebanon. It's not a small fringe group. They run for elections. They have members of parliament. They have hospitals and social activities, etc. It's a very large party in the Lebanese arena. And when people ask us to treat it as if it's an outsider, a small group which really came to Lebanon as if with the last monsoon rain, we think it doesn't make sense, and it's impossible to deal with it as such. We have to deal with realities. In reality, Hezbollah in Lebanon represents a mainstream group of Lebanese, and this is how we deal with it. And whether there is a decision to eliminate it or not is a bit beyond the issue. As far as elections and freedom, we have had a long history of democracy. We have elections every 4 years. We have presidential elections every 6 years. Sometimes the constitution is amended for 3 years. But then there is a succession of leaders, and there is a succession of members of parliament, and there is a great deal of freedom of information and press in Lebanon. Some things that are not, when people talk about the only democracy in the Middle East being Israel, that is not true. We think we are a democracy. Even in the Western sense of the term, the restricted parameters of the West, we have a very free press, one of the rare press in the Middle East that can criticize the leadership without any problem. You can criticize the president and the prime minister in Lebanon, and they do it very happily without any problem. And we have a very lively political life. And they do criticize Syria a lot, actually, and it has become now a national sport. Criticizing the leaders and the Syrians is one of the nicest sports in Lebanon now. I mean, they just do it for good reason or for wrong reasons. But, I mean, there is a very lively and open system in Lebanon, and it is a very democratic process, and there will be elections. And the issue of the Syrians in Lebanon and the relation with Syria is one of the main themes of our elections. So when they talk about Lebanon not having really freedoms or sovereignty, we think, I mean, you should read the newspaper. It's just on the internet, see what they say about each other and how they are dealing with each other. The fact that the Syrians have influence in Lebanon, yes. So the Israelis have influence in this country. The US have influence in Qatar or Saudi Arabia or many other countries. This is the world. If we get our act together, and we will get it, influence, outside influence, will be less important. But to say that by a fiat, by a law, or by a decision, all influence should be simply eliminated, it doesn't make sense also as well. So all these issues of the 1559 are real issues. We're dealing with them practically, but not as matters of black and white to be done now and by, without taking into account the realities on the ground.
Thank you. Can I ask, there's no reason to stand up. There are plenty of chairs here. Please, the people in the back who are standing up, please come down here and sit down. There are plenty of chairs in the front rows, please. Would you like to comment?
Let me say that the passage of 1559 was how would I say, a milestone. We took it seriously in Syria. Now, we do understand that there are more than, probably, I'm not good with numbers, but you would know better than I would. There are more than 100 United Nations resolutions demanding the immediate withdrawal of Israel from the occupied territories and from the Syrian and Lebanese and other Arab territories. And probably there are something like 35 United Nations Security Council resolutions demanding that Israel withdraw from those territories. The United States has used the veto almost something like 60 or 70 times to prevent pending resolutions demanding Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories. However, we understand that this is not a fair world. So we take seriously a United Nations resolution that was aimed at Lebanon and at other countries. I'm not sure about which country they were aiming, but I'm not going to give a hint. What I'm trying to say is the following. As you all know, Syria had something like 45,000 Syrian troops at their peak time. And we kept on withdrawing our troops partially from Lebanon. Today we have only 15,000 troops. And we have not stopped. We will continue doing this. This is a Syrian policy that has been repeatedly publicly declared, and it is being implemented. Most of our troops today are in the border region between Syria and Lebanon. Lebanon, as you have just said, Mr. Ambassador, will have their elections very soon. They have always had a free election in Lebanon every 4 years. And let me tell you, in every election, Syria ends up with 25 to 35 Lebanese MPs, members of parliament, that are staunchly anti-Syrian. But we also end up with lots of Lebanese MPs that are pro-Syrian. Now, what we are telling our critiques, especially the French and the Americans, if you are criticizing our interference in Lebanon, then let us agree that hands off Lebanon. Lebanon will have its free democratic elections very soon. Let the Lebanese people decide and choose what they want. Our policy statement in Syria is the day the Lebanese government will ask our troops to leave, we will leave. We will not stay in Lebanon despite the Lebanese. We do not have hegemonous plans on Lebanon. We do not want to annex Lebanon. Our troops have been there for a very long time. We did not try to impose Syria's economic, political, or social system on Lebanon. Far from it. Actually, it's Lebanon who is teaching us lots of good things from their system, and we are trying to adopt and adapt. I have to be candid with you, and to be honest, and I have to admit that lots of our practices, Syrian troops' practices on Lebanon, were not exemplary. And this is I'm being just very diplomatic. But at least we admit that these were mistakes. They should not have been committed. And we are taking things very seriously today. And we are trying to engage positively towards Lebanon.
Sure. I'd like to follow up on the issue of the Syrian presence. It is a subject of intense debate in Lebanon, and people in Lebanon become very emotional about it. But it should be well understood that the Syrian presence in Lebanon have its constituency. And those supporting the Syrians, some of them are good, some of them are bad. But in the same way, those opposed to the Syrians also have, some of them, agendas and others. We should not perceive that the debate should lead to, demonizing one side and exonerating the other side. I mean, both sides basically want something good for the country. They have a different view of the future. And they have maybe the same view of what the long-term future is, but they do not have the same view of how to reach that point. And that is the main debate about the Syrian presence in Lebanon. It is a very intense subject for the communities here, in the US, for our people here. And in the end of the day, it will be decided by the Lebanese themselves. We know there will be a lot of interference, but these interference from the outside have also other aims. Sometimes people say that Lebanon is simply a theater for some countries, very powerful ones, who want to put pressure on Syria. And that is simply a pressure point. It's for other issues, for Arab-Israeli conflict problems, or for Iraqi issues, etc. But Lebanon, as far as the Lebanese are concerned, is now at a cross point where it should decide how the future will be, and it will be decided by the free elections, which will be run in 3 months.
The argument is made that Syrian troops may well withdraw from parts of Lebanon, but at the end of the day, that Syria will not withdraw from the Bekaa Valley, its military forces, in the absence of a peace agreement between Israel and Syria. Would you comment on that assessment?
I mean, I wouldn't say this is categorically true or untrue. What I would say is both Syria and Lebanon face one common enemy, which is Israel. But both Syria and Lebanon are not entrenched into a position of enmity. Syria has repeatedly invited Israel in the past 18 months to re-engage in a peace process. And we do believe that every single issue, Hezbollah, the offices, our presence or non-presence in Lebanon, everything would be resolved once Israel realized the need to live in peace with its neighbors and to give us back our occupied territories. However, I repeat what I have said. We are not making this a hostage of that. If Lebanon ask Syria that they do not want their troops anymore in Lebanon. We will leave. Senator John Kerry was in Damascus 3 weeks ago. I was with him. He asked this question to President Bashar al-Assad. And President Bashar al-Assad was very clear when he said to him, my vision is that the only place for Syrian troops in the whole world is within Syria itself. We do not want any single Syrian soldier outside Syria. The only reason our troops are there today in Lebanon is to strengthen both our and the Lebanese position vis-à-vis any future peace talks with Israel. This was a presidential statement on Lebanon that was exchanged between Syria and Senator Kerry only 3 weeks ago.
Well, since you've raised the prospects of peace between Israel and Syria, I would like to ask you the following question. There's been some commentary that following statements made by your president, Bashar al-Assad, that Syria is prepared to enter into negotiations with Israel without preconditions. There's been a lot of speculation as to what that means. Would you care to comment on that?
I think you would know better than me on this.
How much is that?
Let me be honest about this. As you all know, Syria was on the verge of signing a peace treaty with Israel 3 times in the past 10 years. Once with Itzhak Rabin, he got assassinated. I'm making it as brief as possible. And then Shimon Peres, who became the Prime Minister of Israel, told us that he is interested in actually accelerating the pace of the peace negotiations between us and the Israelis. And we really were moving even faster than we were moving with Itzhak Rabin, but then he lost the elections. The day he lost the elections, Benjamin Netanyahu became the Prime Minister of Israel, he publicly declared, we are not interested in the principle of land for peace. If Syria wants peace, we will give Syria peace for peace, never land for peace. And that was, you know, the historic, what we call the Rabin deposit. You have another name for it.
Right. No, that's exactly
it's exactly the name in which he stated in written form and gave this to Secretary Warren Christopher, who gave it to President Bill Clinton, stating that Israel is ready to give back Syria its occupied territories in exchange for comprehensive, complete peace. And Rabin used to say the depth of our withdrawal from the Golan would be in correspondence to the depth of peace and normalization between Syria and Israel. So this collapsed for a period of time. There were no peaceful exchanges whatsoever between Syria and Israel. And then Netanyahu lost the elections and Barak became Prime Minister of Israel. Immediately, I mean, I'm making it as simple as possible, we resumed the talks. We were almost there. Our belief, the Syrians believe that we almost, this is the Syrian version, 95% was resolved. The Israelis would say, no, it was almost 80%. But this is unimportant. Both sides felt that we were almost there. However, go and read the voluminous book of Dennis Ross. He tells the whole story. I do not think that anybody, neither the Israelis themselves, nor the Americans, nor the Syrians naturally, blame Syria for the failure of the peace talks. Everybody blamed Barak, all 3 parties, including the chief Israeli negotiators. Go and read what Uri Sadiq has published. Uri Sadiq has published. However, now, 18 months ago, President Bashar al-Assad made a public statement through the New York Times in an interview inviting Israel to resume peace negotiations with Syria. And Sharon said publicly, I know what price Syria wants for this peace, and I'm not ready to give back this price. However, the strong media machine of the Israelis, especially in the United States, had a different message. They were saying, we will not resume peace negotiations with Syria because Syria is putting preconditions. Syria was saying, of course, we need to base these forthcoming peace negotiations, if they happen, on what has been achieved in the past, which we thought was a reasonable logic approach to things. Imagine going back to square zero and probably yet a 4th missed opportunity. And suddenly Israel was saying, well, the Syrians are not serious because they are not saying we are ready to resume peace negotiations without any preconditions. And of course, as usual, they are winning the argument here, and we changed our discourse. Now we are inviting the Israelis, telling them, if you are really serious about this, let's resume peace negotiations without any preset conditions. Having said this, it does not mean that we are not, as a negotiator, of course, you know, when you go to negotiations, each party will have their own positions, their principles, their strategies, what they believe they should get for a fair deal. So it's not, we are not saying that we are not interested anymore in the Rabbin's deposit, and we do not believe that we should regain our national territories from under occupation. It's just we are inviting the Israelis, and we have repeatedly done this too many times in the past 18 months, to resume peace talks unconditionally.
Time is going by quickly. I would like to have your brief comments on your characterization of U.S.-Lebanese relations and U.S.-Syrian relations, respectively. How would you characterize U.S.-Lebanese relations concisely at this point?
The relations are quite good because there is a great deal, a reservoir of goodwill between the two sides. It is based on the presence in this country of about 3.5 million Lebanese, Americans of Lebanese descent. And this is an old immigration, so the Lebanese Americans have well integrated, and they are participant in the political process. And we have now 4 members of Congress who are of Lebanese descent. We used to have 1 cabinet member, Secretary Abraham, Secretary of Energy. We have a senator, Sununu. We have 2 or 3 governors. So it is a a relaxed relationship. But there are points of differences, of course. And one of them is the Hezbollah, which is an important point of discussion. They consider Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. We do not. And we think that the issue of Hezbollah cannot be solved simply by police measures, but by political negotiations regarding the Arab-Israeli conflict. Another issue is the Palestinian refugees problem. You know, when the Syrian ambassador was mentioning the Syrian-Israeli negotiations, the main issue was land, meaning the Golan and the return of the Golan to Syria. In our case, it's not land. I mean, we have a small area called the Shaba Farm, which the Israelis are still occupying, but that's a very minor issue. The main issue for that is that it should be a comprehensive settlement which would address the issue of the refugees, the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. There are about 400,000 of them, which is about 10% of the population. It's as if you're saying we should absorb 27 million Americans here, 10% of the population. Lebanon cannot do that. And for us, there is a unanimity about this issue. Any deal, any peace agreement should address this issue. And we cannot accept to settle the Palestinian refugees present in our land permanently. So this is another issue, the third issue is democracy, or something which has been rising now these days. And we're not a fledgling democracy. We are not. This is not a new thing for us. We are quite an old democracy, and the fact that there are outside troops in Lebanon does not disqualify our democracy. If the presence of foreign troops disqualified the democratic process, then the process in Iraq and in Palestine should be disqualified. Since the U.S. is saying that it is not, the presence of troops does not disqualify a political process, it is the case in Lebanon. Our democracy is quite lively. These are the main 3 issues in the relationship. But apart from that, I mean, the relationship is quite good. There is a foreign aid program still now, $35 million. And there's quite a lot of interaction between the 2 countries, all of it positive.
I know there's a Syrian-American community in the United States that's quite extensive, a huge one. I don't know if you have any senators or congressmen in Congress of Syrian origin.
I wouldn't tell about them.
Even if there were. All right. But I think you have the more difficult brief in characterizing U.S.-Syrian relations. There's the Syria Accountability Act that you're obviously very well aware of. And we have President Bush, in his State of the Union remarks, singled out Syria, along with Iran, as a real problem country. And Secretary Rice just said in the dispatches today that Syria has been unhelpful in a number of ways, adding that Syria knows it must clamp down on terrorism before relations with the United States and the rest of the world can improve. It's interesting, she said, I would hope Syria would not want to be isolated and would not want to have bad relations with the United States. I would hope Syria would react in a more positive way. Your comments.
Of course, let me start by admitting that the U.S.-Syrian relations are going through a very difficult phase. We have always had disagreements with U.S. policies towards the Middle East, but yet we never had such similar difficulties. I mean, if you would count the number of visits by Secretaries Warren Christopher and Madeleine Albright to Damascus in the Clinton administration, they will total over like 50 times, I'm not sure, something like this. And President Nixon, President Ford, President Carter, President Clinton, all those presidents came to Damascus. They visited Syria. So it has not always been the way it is now. Now, of course, we do understand that our fundamental disagreement with the United States on what happened in Iraq made us pay a very heavy political price. We cannot deny that Syria is a small country. The United States is the world unique superpower. Today we are surrounded by two neighbors that are not very friendly to Syria, the United States on our right and Israel on our left. This makes our position very difficult between the hammer and the hard place, but we have to be wise and practical and realistic. We are trying to engage the United States in a constructive dialogue with us. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. Sometimes we feel that the United States is ignoring our cues and our messages. Sometimes, like when they really need our cooperation, they come to us. Even in the past 2-3 months, we had high-level officials from the United States visiting Damascus. They came to us asking us for our help on securing the borders between Syria and Iraq. We did, and they acknowledged this. But they only acknowledged this in their meetings with us, in official meetings, on the record. And they say, thank you for your efforts you have done on this and that. And when they asked us to support the Iraqi elections, they never acknowledged this publicly here. However, I'm not trying to say that we are angels, they are demons, or the other way around. I'm trying to say is we do understand that we cannot afford to have bad political relations with the United States. But things are not always manageable. Sometimes we feel that we are being treated unfairly, and sometimes we still believe, we do believe, even today while we are speaking, that we still have opportunities to re-engage politically with the United States and improve our relationships. And we have reasons to do this because in the end, Syria is a major player in the Middle East, and the United States has repeatedly said that it is committed to help reach peace in the Middle East. This is on one hand. On the other hand, Syria is not an enemy to the United States. We disagreed on what happened in Iraq, but now it has happened. We disagreed for a very long period of time on the United States policies towards the Israeli-Palestinian issue, but this has never prevented us in the past, prevented us from working together. So realistically speaking, we believe that we have a window of opportunity to re-improve relations between both our countries. I can't deny that on a personal level I was shocked when I was attending the speech of the Union address in the Congress and President Bush said that Syria is an obstacle. Go and read what he said, an obstacle to peace in the Middle East. I was shocked because I personally have been engaged in the past 18 months and repeatedly here on the American platform saying we invite Israel to re-engage in the peace process. And publicly, Israel is not hiding this, is saying we're not interested. But yet we are being accused of being an obstacle to peace in the Middle East. However, that was a political statement that we will not really focus on it forever and ever. We will just ignore it, and we will keep on sending messages to the United States, telling them we have the political will to re-engage with you, and we do believe that you are the only possible brokers of peace between us and the Israelis. So we cannot afford to sever contacts with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, I want to thank you both for your excellent responses and your candor. And now I'm going to open it up. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. I'm going to lay down a very important ground rule. No speeches, no comments, but ask a question. If you start making a speech, I'm going to have to ask you to desist. So, questions from the audience, if any. Lady there. If you'd identify yourself and just...
Director of International Students and Scholars. And Ambassador from Syria, thank you so much for coming. Also from what is the major, you've already mentioned this, but what is the major motivation from Syria to have peace with Israel? Is it only the violence, or what would be the major motivation, or maybe top three?
Syria has made a strategic decision, which we call our strategic option for peace. What we are saying, and this has happened like 15 years ago, probably you know this history more than I do. You were ambassador to Damascus. What we want is to regain back our territories, but without going to another war with Israel, by engaging Israel in peace talks. What we believe is that taking into account, yes, we do admit that Israel has military superiority on the ground, but what we believe is that one day the Israelis will realize that they need to have peace with their neighbors so that their grandchildren would live in peace with everybody else. This is our gamble, our bet. This is what we believe in. If we can convince the Israelis, and in a way, we are winning this debate within certain factions in Israel itself. I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic. Although Israel has repeatedly rebuffed our calls to resume peace negotiations in the past 18 months, but if you read the Israeli press, Syria has managed to create an internal debate within Israel itself about whether it's wise or not to rebuff the repeated Syrian invitations to resume this peace call. So what we believe in is the following. We want our territories back. The only way to do this is to engage Israel politically in a peace process, and we believe that nations and the political evolution of nations go through cycles. They like a pendulum. If you look back to the United States after the Vietnam War, America was becoming more and more liberal and to the left, shifting to the left. Today, the United States is shifting more and more towards the right. Nations go through these cyclic shifts. Israel today is not very keen on having peace with Syria, but it was very keen 10 years ago. We still believe that we must be hopeful, and the Israeli public opinion eventually will evolve into understanding the importance of having peace with Syria.
Yes, sir.
Richard Schechter. First, congratulations, Ambassador Derision, on the timely publication of the Baker Institute paper.
Thank you.
And thank you, gentlemen, both very much for coming. I have just a brief question. I listened very carefully, and Ambassador Moustapha, you pointed out that Syria was very afraid of extremism and fundamentalism that would be increased by the American invasion into Iraq. So I'm puzzled, why do the Lebanese allow a foreign power, Iran, to fund, equip Hezbollah, the militia, in the southern part of Lebanon when Hezbollah is an organization that's considered an extremist and fundamentalist organization, and I would think a threat to a stable Lebanese society?
No, again, the perception of Hezbollah as an outside force and a threat from the outside to the society is not very accurate. Hezbollah has emerged during the occupation of the Israelis of part of our land, and there was a movement of resistance. The Israelis, when they occupied Lebanon, many Lebanese welcomed them because we had problems with the PLO in the south, etc. And then the Israelis overcame, their welcome and overstay their welcome, and there was an emergence of a genuinely natives of the land, indigenous movement, which is the resistance of Hezbollah. And to say that it is a foreign organization is really to ignore the facts on the ground. It is a mainstream Lebanese organization and Lebanese party. It has a very large following. It has a large presence. Even on the electoral level, the coming elections, they will be very important players in the elections. So the fact that they receive assistance from outsiders does not change the nature of the beast itself. They are a Lebanese indigenous organization. It should be addressed as such. Their agenda is regarding the Arab-Israeli conflict. The problem will be addressed in this framework. Simply just demonizing them by sticking a nice label of terrorists on their back while exonerating the others by saying, yeah, the killing of civilians on the other side is unacceptable, but on the civilians on our side is acceptable, does not change a thing. There is violence and there is a problem, a political problem. Hezbollah is one element of it. There is assistance from outside to many organizations in many countries. If you're going to disqualify completely any organization or any player simply because it's receiving assistance, my God, I mean, Israel receives assistance, so what? Israel is a player. It receives assistance from the outside. It doesn't make it a U.S. A state or something. So you cannot simply deny the realities. The reality is that it is an indigenous movement. It has its following. It has its agenda. It should be dealt with as a political issue.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have one question in back and one question here. Then I'm going to have to close it because we're getting late.
In southern Iraq, the Shias, if this notion that that event is going to sort of infect Iran and make some ground swell changes there. Do you guys have a sense about that? Are you getting a sense from your contacts that there's sort of foment going on at the populist level in Iran at all?
Iran is very lively, has a very lively democratic or at least electoral process. Of course, it's not a Western-style democracy, but they have very lively elections. And I would say that some of the prerequisites of democratic practices exist in Iran. So when they say that there would be a contagion between the Shiites here and the Shiites there, I'm not sure what you mean, really. I mean, they have already. The mullahs are winning in Iraq. So it should, maybe the reverse would be, it's reinforcing the other. The parties which are supported by the religious leadership in Iraq are actually the majority. So the good thing about what happened in Iraq now is that these leaders, these religious leaders, have already stated they will not lead the government themselves, and the prime minister will be a secular, chose a secular person. But I don't think that the area is really alien to these concepts of electoral process and democracy. Once you create the right setup, people run for elections and they vote, and this atmosphere exists already.
Medical student here and a very proud Syrian American. And I want to thank Dr. Moustapha for coming, and Dr. Abboud. Your answers have been so insightful and honest and substantive. I really appreciate it. I read a lot about the news in Syria, and I was reading about billboards in Damascus encouraging people to vote in the Iraqi elections, the Iraqi expatriates in Syria. And we've had elections in Iraq. We've had elections in Palestine. It seems that they were honest elections with international observers. My question to you, Dr. Moustapha, is what strides is Syria making towards a more open democratic system?
Look,
That's a very good question from a Syrian American.
Syria is going through a very serious reform process, but we are facing also formidable challenges in this process. I really need to balance two issues, how to be very honest with you, and also to remember that I am the ambassador of the Syrian government. What I'm trying to tell you is the following. In the past 3-4 years, Syria has dramatically evolved into expanding civil liberties and into allowing more and more freedoms. There is a path. I'm not claiming today that Syria is Switzerland. What I'm claiming is that we can see the tunnel, the light by the end of the tunnel, and we are moving towards this. Now, to be very honest with you, I would tell you, if you select a narrow window to judge what's happening in Syria, then you might end up with the following outcome. Like, if you take a short window of like the past 4 months, you would say, this is wonderful, what's happening in Syria is really great. If you take another narrow window, like what happened 2 years ago, you would say, this is terrible, this is a setback to the reform movement in Syria. I am an engineer, and I'm realistic in my approaches to things. I would say, if you take a wide window and you judge what's happening in Syria, I would say we are moving forward. 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. This is bad, this is not good, this is exasperating. People in Syria who really are pushing hard towards political reform, but I am optimistic. Now, very soon, 2 important landmarks will take place in Syria. This is my reading of the situation. The first one will happen probably June 2005, when there will be, for the first time, like for ages, there will be a new law allowing for all political parties to form freely in Syria. This would be a landmark in the Syrian reform process. The other one would be, and I really would like to say this, it's not easy for me to say it, but I will. If you go back 10 years ago and you look at the file of human rights in Syria, it's not something that will please any human being. But if you are objective and you look at the reports of Human Rights International and Amnesty International, you would see that they are reporting that the number of political detainees have dramatically decreased in Syria from something like thousands 10 years ago to almost 600 today. But let me say this, even if we have 1 single political detainee in Syria, this is still very bad. Now, what I have heard is that the Syrian government is moving seriously towards closing this file once and forever. We do not want to have in Syria anymore what we used to have and what you still have here in the United States, something like the Guantanamo Bay, where prisoners don't know what are they being charged of. They do not have attorneys, they do not have a sentence, they don't know when they will be tried. We used to have this a lot in Syria, but at least we are determined that this will not be the case in the near future. So let me tell you this, I'm not belittling the obstacles we are still facing in this phase. Every society has its internal dynamics, but the momentum is there. However, I meet here in the United States, I meet with the representatives of the Syrian opposition, and all the spectrum of Syrian opposition would always tell me, while we agree with the Syrian government, while we would disagree with the Syrian government, while we strongly disagree with the Syrian regime, but we will never, ever accept or advocate a situation in which the United States will send its troops to introduce democracy to Syria, and in a way similar to what it has done in Iraq. And I'm not talking about ordinary Syrian citizens who are just political observers. I'm talking about the leadership of the Syrian opposition here in the United States, people who are staunch enemies of the Syrian regime. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think you could agree with me that given the restrictions, and I've been there when you're an ambassador representing a country, this has been a very candid expose from both the Lebanese and the Syrian ambassadors. And I want to thank you both very much for agreeing to come and to share this podium. And I will invite you back, hopefully in better circumstances. I do want to announce that the Baker Institute will be initiating an Israeli-Syrian workshop in which we are going to bring Israelis who have been involved in the negotiations to get their narrative of the peace talks from 1991 to the present, and do the same with the Syrians, and see where the gaps are that need to be filled as a step, as an academic institution in neutral ground, to determine the parameters of what needs to be done once the needle does point back to Israeli-Syrian negotiations. Thank you very much for coming this evening.